Yo, what's going on guys? Cultimush back at it with a $1,200 gaming PC featuring the GTX 1070. A lot of you guys have been requesting me to configure a gaming PC with the GTX 1070, and I really didn't want to make a video on it until I myself got my hands on the video card. And now that I really know what the video card can do, and now that I can really recommend it to you guys, let's go and make this video. This build actually comes well under $1,200. Right now it's going for around $1,130. If you decide to use the mail-in rebates, it'll knock it down to just a little over $1,100. But I do know that a lot of places are marking up the GTX 1070, so you might have to spend a little bit more, but it shouldn't be anywhere over $1,200. With that being said, let's get right into this with the CPU. So for this build, I decided to go the Skylake route, the Intel Core i5-6600K 3.5 GHz quad-core processor. This is a fantastic CPU, and while Skylake hasn't made tremendous strides over previous generation i5s, it is better in terms of power consumption, and still as an overall CPU, the i5 is an absolute beast. And with it being a K-series CPU, you can overclock it, but it should be mentioned that K-series i5s don't come with stock coolers, but that isn't a big deal. If you're picking up a K-series i5, you're gonna want to overclock it, and you're gonna want a bit better of a CPU cooler than what would be a stock cooler. So at the very least, pick up something like a Cooler Master Hyper 212 EVO or a CryoRig H7. That's gonna do the trick pretty well. It's gonna let you overclock a little bit, but nothing crazy. But even if you slightly overclock the i5-6600K, man, this CPU is an absolute beast. And this paired with a GTX 1070 is gonna give you ridiculous gaming performance whether you're playing at 1080p or 1440p. Moving on to the motherboard, I went with the MSI Z170-A Pro ATX LGA1151 motherboard. This is a fully sized ATX motherboard, obviously on the Z170 chipset. It's got 4 RAM slots up to DDR4 3200. It supports up to 64GB of RAM. It's got RAID support, 2 SATA 60bps ports, and 2 SATA Express ports. And it's got onboard USB 3 headers. So this motherboard isn't loaded with features, but it's coming to the market at around $105 to $110, which is a really solid price for a Z170 board. Comparatively, a lot of the nicer boards are around $150 to $170, and I don't think a lot of you guys do want to spend that much money on a motherboard. This board from MSI will still get the job done, and at more of a budget, you know, $1,200 I still consider somewhat of a budget build. I think that's really what you want out of a motherboard, and this is still gonna do a great job in your build. Moving on to RAM, I decided to go with G.Skill Ripjaws V-Series 16GB to 8GB 6 is DDR4 RAM running at 2400 MHz. So yeah, I think if you're building a $1,200 PC, you should just go with 16GB of RAM. Is it crucial to have it for gaming? Not really, but 16GB of DDR4 RAM is only $60. That is such a crazy good deal for 16GB of RAM that at this budget, you might as well go with it. And 16GB does come in handy if you are doing things like video editing, live streaming, and some games will take advantage of you having 16GB. Just Cause 3 is actually one of those games. So at this price point, if you're building a PC that's over $1,000, you should just go with 16GB of RAM. It's only $60, and it's definitely going to be a nice addition to the PC. Moving on to storage, first for the mechanical hard drive, I went with the Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB. This goes for around $45 to $47, and this is going to be your mass storage device. You're going to put all your games, movies, pictures, all that kind of stuff is going to go on the Caviar Blue. I have a few of these hard drives myself in my PC. Over the last 4 or 5 years, I think I've had 3 or 4 of them, and only one has failed on me in that time span. And that hard drive failed 3 years after I bought it, so I've had really good experiences with the Caviar Blue. And for around $45, it's going to act as a great mass storage device. Obviously, at this budget, you're also going to want an SSD. The Samsung 850 EVO 120GB SSD for only $65 is going to act as a very solid boot drive. However, being that it's only 120GB, you're not going to be able to put much more on it than Windows or whatever your operating system is. So if you guys do have the extra cash to spend, I would highly recommend going with a 240GB SSD. If you go with that, that's going to let you put a few games on there that you want access to the most, and it's definitely a lot nicer than having only 120GB because that gets cramped pretty quickly. I mean, I have a 240GB SSD and that's getting pretty cramped, but again, I am the kind of person that loads a few games onto their SSD. If you just decide to have your SSD as only a boot drive, then 120GB is going to be fine, and for $65, you really can't go wrong with it. For the video card, it's the Gigabyte GeForce GTX 1070 8GB G1 GPU. This is going for around $420. It's sold out in a lot of places, so really at this point, you can't be too picky with what kind of GTX 1070 you want if you are in the market for them. As soon as they come in stock, they go out of stock pretty quickly, but the Gigabyte GTX 1070 I have seen in stock in a couple places, and it is going for around $420, which is a pretty good price for a GTX 1070. Like I said, at a lot of places, these prices have been marked up. It's a very hot item, so at this point, if you do want it, you're gonna have to pay a pretty penny for it. But as far as performance of the 1070 goes, it is absolutely tremendous. If you're looking for a premier video card to game at 1440p, the 1070 is a very good option. I played The Witcher 3 maxed out with Hairworks turned on and I was getting about 50 frames per second. And then if you turn off Hairworks, you'll get well over 60 FPS. Battlefield 4 ran at like 90 frames per second at 1440p maxed out. Fallout 4 ran really well. Metal Gear Solid 5 ran really well. Just about every game on the market at 1440p, it's gonna run really well. I'm not gonna say you can max out every game at 1440p and get 60 frames per second. Obviously, that's not the case as evident by a game like Witcher 3. There's just some games that either have ridiculous settings or they're just not optimized very well and no GPU is really gonna be able to run them at consistent frame rates. But for the most part, at 1440p, the GTX 1070 is going to give you a really great experience for the price. And then obviously, if for whatever reason you decide to pick up this GPU for 1080p gaming, you're going to be stomping through every game. But in all honesty, if you're picking up a 1070, you might want to invest in a 1440p monitor as well, because at 1080p, it's going to do really well. But this is a GPU that if you want to get the most out of it, you should be gaming at 1440p. For the power supply, I went with the EVGA 650 watt 80 plus gold certified semi-modular power supply. 650 watts is going to be more than enough to power this build. The i5-6600K, as I said, is super power efficient, and the GTX 1070, being a higher end video card, is fairly power efficient as well. And since I'm not a big advocate for having an SLI configuration anyway, this PSU for $75 is going to do a great job. Finally, for the case, I went with the NZXT S340 ATX mid-tower case. This case is available on Newegg for $60 right now after a $10 mail-in rebate. It's available in a variety of different colors. I would recommend going for the black and red look. That's gonna go a little bit with the color scheme of the build, but you can go with whatever color you want. That's not really a big deal. They're all priced similarly. And the NZXT S340 is one of the most well-reviewed cases on the market. It's got a very sleek look, it's got the side window that everybody loves, you can show off your PC to your friends, and it comes to the market at a palatable price point for a fairly high quality case. So that's gonna wrap up this video. If you guys are in the market for building a GTX 1070 centric PC, I think this is a great one that's not gonna kill your bank account too much. So as always guys, thanks for watching. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you dislike, hit the dislike button. And if you have a request for a future video, leave it in the comments section down below, and I will catch you guys in the next one. Peace out.